Well, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this industry panel, Animation in a Neurodiverse World. My name is Julian Scott. I'm the animation consultant at Film London. If you don't know what Film London is and what we do, we are the screen agency, unsurprisingly, covering London. Basically, we connect ideas, talent, and finance. We nurture and develop a diverse, pioneering creative culture and help deliver success in animation, film, television, games, and beyond. To put this panel into a little bit of context, back in 2021, I wrote a strategy for Film London and its role in animation here in London. Covered all aspects of what it takes to have a vibrant, growing commercial sector, as well as what talent and skills the sector actually needs. Through the research, it became obvious that although animation is one of the more diverse and inclusive areas of the screen industries, more work should be done in the sector to engage, attract, and retain the incredible talent that some of the studios seem to be missing, possibly through no fault of their own. Some of that talent has physical challenges, and to an extent, that's relatively easy to deal with. What can be harder is reaching and retaining people who have what might be called hidden disabilities, being neurodiverse being one. And that's what we're here to talk about today. But before I introduce the panel and the discussion, I want to show you a short reel from an organization called Business Disability International, which I hope will set the tone a little bit. And this time, unlike yesterday, I hope I will, I can find the right button, which I can't at the moment, bear with, as they say. Let me get the right one. There we go. And I hope this will sort of set the scene for what we're going to discuss today. Right, here we go.
Imagine if everyone in your life who has a disability suddenly just disappeared. Oops, there go the 10% dyslexic, the 13% hearing impaired, the 10% with sight loss, diabetes, arthritis, learning disabilities, depression, facial disfigurement, dementia and stroke, asthma, speech impairment, wheelchair users, multiple sclerosis, migraines, anxiety, sickle cell, amputation, brain damage, cerebral palsy, RSI, epilepsy, muscular dystrophy. Before we know it, there'd be no one left. There are more than 1 billion people with disabilities worldwide, and the number is growing. Yet how many of us, when we hear this word disability, automatically click to the old assumptions? Nothing to do with me, it's just a few wheelchair users, blind people, dogs. Doctors and charities take care of them. When actually the experience of disability, the unfairness and disadvantage that it brings, is very much about me. In fact, about all of us. About our experience as we go through life, and about getting older, which most of us would like to do. Actually, we all know human perfection is rare. Why bother with the Olympics if everyone can do a 3-minute mile? The real problem is our sad tendency to make assumptions about each other on the basis of labels. How we ourselves expect to be treated is changing, as we recognize that we all have a basic right to respect, dignity, and choice. We need to replace the unacceptable old focus on medical labels with the new focus on individual potential, dignity, and human rights. The old brain makes assumptions. Everyone just knows that blind people can't use the internet. The new brain asks, how could this talented blind researcher do this job if we were clever? Simply put, impairment is what happens to you, disability is what we do to you. Refuse the ramp, refuse flexi time, insist you apply online even though the technology won't let you. Refuse to let you use a different keyboard. Assume you are just not worth the bother. That old click comes through especially loud and clear when you hear the traditional challenge. So what is the business case for hiring disabled people? But just think, nobody asks, what is the business case for hiring, say, Canadians? Everyone knows some can do the job, some can't, some have the talent, some don't, some need adjustments, some do not. We don't generalize about 35 million people labeled Canadians. Why on earth do we still generalize about more than 1 billion people labeled disabled? And yes, I am Canadian. And listen hard to the disabled graduate's new brain reaction. Why do you need a business case for treating me properly? Business Disability International wants to start a brand new conversation which drives a global revolution as disabled and not yet disabled come together to ask, how do we replace the old brain with the new? And in case you're wondering who this Canadian is, I'm Susan Scott Parker, Chief Executive of Business Disability International.
So there we go. I hope that gives you some sense of, I don't know, how I learned. It was only when we started doing our disability strategy that I discovered I'm technically disabled. I have type 1 diabetes. I'd never thought about it before. And, you know, the companies that I work with, I talk to about it because there are times when I do need some support and some help and some changes to be made to my environment to help me give my best. Anyway, enough about me. I have 5 talented, smart, and quite possibly brave people on the panel today who are prepared to talk quite candidly about their situation. We hope to shed some light on what it's like to be neurodiverse and work in or want to work in animation. We've got Blue Zoo represented here, you know, a large studio doing quite a lot to attract and accommodate a relatively untapped, rich seam of talent. And we hope we're going to inspire studios and animators to work together to create a more neurodiverse friendly sector. So the panel, Paulene Hamilton. Paulene's head of people and talent at Blue Zoo. She joined the studio in 2017, having previously worked in the creative industries for 30 years. She worked in architecture, art and design, fine art, and contemporary crafts. In the studio's first dedicated people and talent role, she looks after the PFT team, which oversees HR, recruitment, and talent management. She's also one of the 5 beekeepers at the studio who oversee the commitment to Blue Zoo C Corp accreditation. Simon Taylor, and Simon, I do apologise. I think we gave you the wrong surname as Simon Davies, so it is definitely Simon Taylor. Simon's an animator and director whose most recent work includes animating on the Smeds and the Smooths and series directing number blocks for CBeebies. He's also worked on Sarah and Duck and Tree Food Tom for CBeebies, as well as Disney's John Carter. It's also worth mentioning that Simon runs the YouTube channel Autism and Animation, talking about navigating the animation industry from a neurodiverse point of view. Ari Atak. Ari is driven by curiosity and passion for creative problem solving, communication and storytelling, worked across disciplines in the creative industries. And I hope I get this right, Ari. In classic neurospicy style, the career is diverse, including model making, illustration, color grading and restoration, voice acting, production, and generally useful all-round adapter to whatever needed at the timer, which I think is quite a good title. Ari is currently filling a long-held dream in learning the craft of character animation through apprenticing with Blue Zoo and loving every minute of it. David Crabtree. David's a teacher who's made a life study of the theatre of the classroom. He's also well known for his work on neurodiversity and learning differences. He's worked in a range of settings, accumulating experience in schools, colleges, higher education and prisons. A number of publications against his name, and in recent times he's become more involved with animation with talks on 3D, the language of the brain. David's here for a number of reasons, one of which is that he and I are working on an initiative with Film London, which we have called a neurodiverse superhighway into animation. And Alex Davies. Alex is a Greek-British designer turned filmmaker. He started his career as a service designer after studying product design at the Glasgow School of Art. Following a late-in-life ADHD diagnosis, he reframed his lifelong struggle with mental health and became intimately aware of how crucial representation is. Driven by his belief that animation can be uniquely impactful in expressing how consciousness is experienced, he's pursued a master's degree in animation at the Royal College of Art. Whilst he was there, he produced his first animated film using techniques he developed to utilize ADHD as an asset to the process rather than a hindrance during its production. And although this might feel slightly awkward to people out there in audience land, I think this panel deserves a round of applause for being here. So thanks, guys. Alex, I deliberately introduced you last because you generously offered to showcase your film, A Perfect Morning Situation, which you've said aims to showcase how ADHD is experienced internally, as opposed to how it's more commonly represented. So putting you front and center just for a minute, would you mind introducing the film and explaining how and why it came about?
Sure. Hi, I'm Alex, who've already just heard quite a bit about me. The film itself was very much made out of my frustration with how ADHD has been represented in everywhere that I've seen it since forever, which very much led to me not getting diagnosed until very late in life, because it was only ever shown as through the lens of what is annoying to the people around you. So things like hyperactivity and not standing still and being like frustrating to those who like classrooms and things, none of which were things that I struggle with that much. So the entire kind of internalized aspect of how to cope with that is not shown anywhere. So I never really thought of it as a serious thing. And not until a couple of years ago did I start realizing that many of the things that I'm struggling with are very much connected to how I had to kind of like adapt and patchwork my own kind of self-policing methods for existing. And yeah, the film that I made was through this kind of recent self-discovery, going through medications and starting to kind of like look at how I'm thinking in a different kind of lens and trying to express that in some kind of way. It's its own kind of thing. So I think I'm going to send the link to the film in the chat, and the film itself is 5 minutes. I can give people, I don't know, until 20 past to see the film and come back, and I will also screen it here, but it might be better quality if you go to the link, whatever you feel most comfortable with, and then
yeah, I mean, if you wouldn't mind just playing it in now, otherwise it will have a very delicious 5 minutes of people not doing anything.
Yes, 1 second.
Thank you.
So this is the link, and that's the password. I'm just gonna ask, don't like publicly share it anywhere because it's doing its festival run at the moment, and apparently festivals don't like that. So I'm also gonna share the thing.
Right, how much time do I have? Oh God, I have an hour! Do I even have time for meditation? Like today is gonna be the day you meditate.
Alan, thank you so much for sharing. I just as a piece of animation, I think it's fantastic. Let alone what it must have taken for you to create it. And I want to come back to you in a little while and ask a little bit more about that. But and I'm not, I know that no two people who identify as being neurodiverse are are similar. But Simon, I mean, you're obviously a director. You had a relatively late diagnosis too, didn't you? Would you mind just briefly taking us through sort of prior to that, getting the diagnosis, and then what happened after that?
Yeah, so I started working in the animation industry in 2009. I didn't get my diagnosis till 2022. So up until that point, I had no idea that I was neurodivergent at all. And basically all the ways that in retrospect, I now know about all the kind of coping strategies that I'd figured out along the way, which at that point I was defining as being perfectly fine, basically, because I suddenly had all the coping strategies. But yeah, I ended up getting a diagnosis because I'd been sort of struggling with mental health for a while, and started coming across certain autistic traits, and was starting to relate to quite a few of them. And then, yeah, after I got my diagnosis, it's just sort of, it's been quite enlightening, because I've realized that there are certain coping strategies that weren't coping strategies at all, and certain mindsets that I had, which now I know that I'm autistic. I now know a different way around certain problems. So there were certain things, like certain social situations, where I previously would think, well, if I just keep doing this the same way, eventually this situation will get easier. Whereas now I know, oh, actually, I need to approach it a slightly different way. Yeah, I've slightly forgotten your question.
No, it's fine. Don't worry. No, just sort of, how, since you got your diagnosis, how things have changed, and you said you were trying to find out to the coping strategies, which you realised weren't coping. So once you had the diagnosis, did you find support, I suppose, within work and outside work that helped you move forward? Yeah,
well, I think I've been very lucky to work at a studio that's very, very understanding, very willing to learn. So I've made my situation known, but I haven't had to be constantly asking for certain support here and there. I've sort of just, it's been more like, oh, I could use help with this sort of thing, and it's been a fairly natural sort of fluid conversation. I mean, that's just my one experience, but a lot of it's been a lot of sort of self-discovery and sort of self-reevaluation of, for example, I when I was diagnosed, I was told about this terms of tangential thinking, but basically it's when, for example, if I'm in a meeting with a number of people, and I'm trying to both hold on to the topic of conversation and decide what I'm going to say next. And by the time I verbalized my thought, the conversation's already moved on 3 steps ahead, to the point where when I finally verbalize what I'm saying, there's often that moment of, well, where did that come from? Right, now, back to the topic at hand. Now I know that, it's just a case of, keeping notes, writing things down, and sometimes after the meeting coming back and saying, oh, I've just had this thought. So it's that sort of thing.
And Ari, you were nodding very sagely while Simon was saying things, like you had similar experiences.
Oh, it's just because I'm frantically writing notes throughout this, because every time somebody's saying something, it's like, oh, that's really interesting, and that connects to this, and seeing those connections and the speed at which you're processing things might be different. It might be faster, it might be slower, but it can cause you to either interject at the wrong moment, which is what I'm sort of holding back from doing, or to have your thought ready at an inconvenient point. And as we know in animation, timing and pacing is everything. So challenge sometimes.
And Pauline, if I can bring you in here, because obviously both Simon and Ari work with Blue Zoo, and as head of people, not looking after, that's the wrong phrase, but supporting and helping to make adjustments that enable Simon and Ari to do their best work, come under your remit. How does, Simon's obviously been very complimentary about Blue Zoo, but how do you approach this as a company, as an individual who's responsible for talent?
I think Simon's been very kind to us. We do care. As a company, we genuinely do care. What I would say is that I don't want to be reductive about it, but I do feel like, if somebody needs wheelchair access, that's relatively straightforward to try and organise. I think for other accessibility issues, it's a big thing for organisations to really genuinely say, what can we do to support and help? And I think that Blue Zoo, we're constantly doing our best and trying to do the best that we can. But I also recognise is that we're not necessarily, we've not got there at all. So I think, Ari knows this, Simon knows this. We've put in place certain things like workplace assessment, which I think has been really good, but then following up on the outcome of those workplace assessments, I don't feel I think we've got more to go on that.
No, sure. I'm sure it's an ongoing discussion, and I think it obviously has to be a two-way thing. You've got to create an environment where your team, your talent feel confident and comfortable enough, as Simon was saying, to sort of speak up and say, here I am. This is what I think I need in order to deliver my best work. And you as an employer have to try and find ways. And
I do think the pandemic has probably provided a lot of opportunity to be much more flexible. But I think there's a downside to that, which is that it's maybe not given us enough of a human, personal way of dealing with it.
Well, I think there's a really interesting point that everyone's touched on so far, which is the initial opening video you shared was talking about how to accommodate disabled individuals. And in Alex's animation, you have that moment where you say, how could I let it get this bad? And it's pushing all of this back onto the individual and expecting them to self-advocate and to know what's best, when actually I imagine at least David is familiar with Ken Robinson's talk on creativity. Yeah. And I watched that when I was in my early 20s, and I took away from it like, oh, she's not sick. This person he's talking about is not sick. They're a dancer. They're just creative.
Julian Lin, that's right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. On Julian Lin, and unfortunately, I feel for myself, I took away the wrong message from that, which was to downplay the potential for my environment to be disabling to me. I was just like, oh, I'm just creative, and it's who I am, and that's fine. And I didn't get my diagnosis for another decade because I didn't think to look for external support at that point. I was looking internally for how to fix myself. And when we're trying to include better accessibility to the workplace, quite often it's like, how do I make this accessible for this individual, rather than viewing it as a systemic problem of systems that have been built for neurotypicals are not always as accessible for neurodivergent folk, and it's systemic and it's at a deeper level.
No, that's very fair. David, if I can just bring you in here, because obviously you're not deeply involved with the animation sector. You're looking at this from slightly outside, but obviously your experience in education and neurodiversity. What are you hearing here? Does this reflect stuff that's outside the animation sector? I can't believe it's unique to animation.
I think there's a number of things really that are coming out of the conversation. I think Ari's point about the way the world has really been shaped by what would be called neurotypical. The majority of people have shaped practices and processes, and that's as true in education as it is elsewhere. And then the difficulty for anybody who's neurodiverse is, how do I sort of fit in with something that's being created by somebody who thinks of the world in a different way than I think of the world, or reacts to the world in a different way in which I react to the world. So one of the things I'm taking away from this for education is the sort of discussions that we're having here are the sort of discussions that I would like to see happening in school when children are about 5 or 6 or 7 years old. Discussions about how they're thinking, how they're responding, how they're solving problems, because really those are the cognitive processes which are so important in terms of the future world. If we're going to unlock the intellectual talent that we have within the population, then we really have to enable people to produce the best with their intellectual skills. And that's as true within education. It's also obviously true within animation. So that's what I'm hearing. I'm picking up messages in that sort of way. I think it's also quite interesting in that there's seemed to be a plea coming from some of the discussions, in a sense, Pauline's point about the processes that are there. At present, it's relatively static, isn't it? one sort of has an initial assessment and tries to find out what people want. But in reality, when people are in the situation, they maybe they suddenly realise there are other things they need. So how do we get organisations to become more dynamic and organic in the way they respond to the needs of the people that are there? Particularly, we're talking about creative people. Creative people are going to be, by their very nature, thinking in lots of different ways and doing things in lots of different ways than maybe lots of organisations have shaped themselves to be. So the discussion for me is there are things that are important for education coming out of this, and I think there are important things coming for the industry generally. That's all I want to really make.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, one of the things that, as you've just said, David, about, and I said at the beginning, is studios finding ways to engage with people who are neurodiverse and try and attract them in. And sometimes even the way that job adverts are written, must be a good communicator, must be a good team player, which could actually put some people off. And Ari, if I'm right in thinking, you ended up going for a job at Blue Zoo because of the way they advertised the role, didn't you?
That's correct. Yeah. So it was a call for applicants who were diverse and that they were welcome and would be recognised. And I think it's the recognition that you might be able to support someone who is different to the way that you're usually supporting them, and knowing that there's that openness, and it is still an ongoing conversation of how we do that best, and how, because I want to give my best. That's all anyone wants to do, is you want to come, and everyone said it, I want to come and I want to do my best work. We all want to be productive and beneficial to the business. So it's us knowing that when we come to a workplace, that conversation channel is open and that there will be that recognition, because sometimes if you're trying to talk to someone who just really doesn't get it, that can be an uphill struggle. So it's the fact that senior management and people who are hiring and your teams have an awareness that maybe traits that previously have been internalized as negative traits might not be as reductive as they think they are, and having that openness.
Thank you. And Simon, I remember you when we were talking earlier. I don't want you to mention any companies, but you felt you actually lost a job because of your situation.
Yeah. Actually, what I didn't mention, I'd lost two. One at university, so this wasn't actually in the animation industry, but both from sort of neurodiversity kind of related, like autistic-related traits. I now know in hindsight, but because one of the sort of recurring themes I've sort of seen over the years is the cognitive load that it can have when you're not giving clear information or clear feedback, clear direction. So, for example, if you're working on a shot that's just that's not working and it's just going around in circles, some people's, in some directors' instinct might be to just stay positive and tell them everything's fine, but sometimes that can cause a lot of self-doubt, a lot of imposter syndrome, and the cognitive load of that causes quite a lot of trouble. And I think a lot of it just comes down to being very honest about what is working, what isn't working. Is it the artist's work that isn't working? Is it the director's not quite sure? That's probably the most recurring theme that I've seen. I think it was a relatively simple fix. It doesn't fix everything, but I think it's definitely a recurring thing I've seen over the years. But I think that's why that one instance that we talked about happened, was I just ended up with this burnout of just frozen up, not really being able to do anything, because I got to this point just constantly second guessing myself.
It can be a challenge in business as well of how much honesty you have in communication. I mean, especially for me, where I'm relatively far down the chain, but need to have a full picture to operate at my best so that I can make those decisions and have those thought processes. But I don't know what's going on at the top of the company. I'm a junior animator apprentice. I'm not running an entire studio with hundreds of people and trying to make the wheels stay on the business and everything be good for everyone. So I can come and say, I really need a desk in a quiet area because I'm going to get distracted if I'm sitting by the kitchen and I can chat to everyone. And it might be, well, that's great, but actually we've got 50 other people who also want the desk that's in a quiet place, and we don't have that facility at the moment. So asking for honesty, like for a lot of neurodivergent people, honesty is really important and directness of communication, but a lot of our social systems don't have that built into them.
No, sure. I mean, Alex, I mean, you've just, you've finished your masters now. You've got your film going out to the festivals, which I hope will be a great success. But I'm assuming you're going to be looking for work as an animator and working in animation studios. Are there any things that sort of worry you, make you anxious about that from your situation?
A lot, yeah. I mean, on the one hand, the idea that even though the part that I am very comfortable with, which is the actual making part, where I've spent all of my effort developing, to get access to any of that, I need to pass through a part that is literal hell for me, of a kind of weird bureaucracy and administrative tasks of applying for roles. And just because of the amount of people who are also applying, it's inherently opaque. So you never get any kind of response of what's happening or what people are actually kind of looking for and things, and everything looks the same. So everything kind of becomes noise. So just that aspect of it is a bit of a nightmare. And the other side of it is not being sure how I would fit in a studio environment, because the way that I have taught myself to learn and the way that I find that I work is in dedicated massive blocks of time where I'm working on something and nothing else exists, which doesn't fit very well in a 9-to-5 schedule. So I've been trying to kind of figure out what would be a good balance and how that would fit within an industry. But I also think that because I'm thinking of it from the outside, I might be over theorizing, and it might be simpler once you're actually in the room and can talk to people and figure out what works and what doesn't.
That's absolutely the key of it, isn't it? Like being in the room and being able to talk to people and figure it out and have a flexible conversation when some systems are very rigid because they need to cope with large volumes of applicants, and what you have and what you need individually might work brilliantly. And it's why animation is so appealing, because it's a team effort where you all come together and you play to your strengths, but you have to get into that team situation in the first place where you can go, this person's a maintainer and they love order and maintenance and they want to sort of look at when we need to deliver this and what the schedule is. And I'm there going, if you do that to me, I'm just going to try and do all of the things all at once as much as possible at 100 miles an hour, maybe not in the most rational of orders. But if you turn around to me and say, can you do this thing by this time for this reason? Bam, yeah, sure, it's done. And that would be somebody else's idea of hell, and they would hate to be doing what I'm doing, and vice versa. So it's getting into that situation.
But I imagine
communicate your flexibility.
Yeah, I imagine having an environment where you can candidly talk about what works for you and what doesn't, and being able to also express, for example, if you would like more transparency on something, even if it is less polite, and you're like, can you actually tell me if this doesn't work? Because even though it doesn't fit more social cues, it would really help me. That, like, being in an environment where you can communicate your own needs without that being seen as weird, I think it could really help people get the most and feel comfortable at work, because everyone wants to do that.
Alex, I think that's really, and Ari, I think that's really interesting. And I think that if you have a smaller team, you can really work that out. I think when you have a slightly bigger team, it takes a bit more attention to try and work that out, but I think it's possible. I think it's feasible. You know, everybody's different. All of their inputs and ways of working are really important. But I appreciate what you're saying.
I think as well, when you're in a business like ours where you naturally need to sort of expand and contract because of the demands of production changing. To build that trust. It's something that can come with time if you know that a studio has a good track record of not only attracting diverse talent, but retaining it and listening to it and growing from it, and it being a mutually beneficial business situation. Then that's maybe a way to get around this, because sometimes it is just that you've been somewhere for a long time and you know that you can make those requests without it sort of coming back around to bite you, because there's always that fear when we've grown up with the fear and shame and lack of confidence that if you're different and if you ask for people to recognize that difference and accommodate it, you will be put on the naughty list, to be sort of like seasonally appropriate of, well, we're not going to hire that person again because they're difficult. So that the survival instinct is, I'll get your head down and don't say anything and just do a good job and then get out and get on to the next thing. But that's not going to create this growth and this movement towards prosperity.
Yeah.
I wonder whether sort of managerially as well, that some of this comes down to, like, if someone's gotten a job, they're clearly capable, they've gotten that far, they've gotten the job. So if something is going wrong once they've got that job, then odds are it's something to do with the workplace setup that isn't quite working, and it's ultimately the end result that's probably got a broad thing to say, but I feel like ultimately it's the end result. If someone's getting their work done in their way, that's more important than if they've hit certain checkpoints in a typically more rigid way or something like that. So I've definitely known people who have left things to like the last second and have created some of the best work. And then I've been on some projects where you were time sheeted almost to the minute, and the cognitive strain of that just completely stopped me from being able to work effectively. And so,
or people check out and they go, okay, I can't. You're not giving me what I need to think this problem through and solve this problem myself. So I'm just going to have to look to you and you end up needing to micromanage people because, and then everyone, I presume, maybe some people like micromanaging people, but everyone loses from that situation. You're not sort of getting what you paid for in hiring someone who has these abilities.
I imagine there's also a strain because you're not always going to know what works for you best. And there is a certain amount of experimentation of like trying different managerial styles and trying different kind of like co-working styles. And I imagine in an organization, if you specifically say, can we try this because I think that will help me, and then that doesn't fully work, then there's also the stress of like, shit, no, I can't. I have to change this to be like, maybe we do it like this, because you're like, how much can I push this until I become a nuisance?
Yes.
Whereas it is just people trying to do their best work. And I don't think anyone gets into animation for the money. So I don't know, it feels like...
I think our experience is that, I mean, this doesn't happen that often, but sometimes somebody is so suited to a show, like they're so suited to it, and there are other shows that it's just not for them, and that's not because they aren't skilled or talented or whatever. It's just, it might be comedic timing or whatever, and that's fine. Like, I couldn't work in a bank. It's not going to work for me. Do you know what I mean? So there are things where it's like, this isn't to do with your ability to animate or whatever. It's just that this just isn't the show for you. But there's going to be another show for you, probably in our studio, and that that, Simon. Some people are going to be able to do X show. I'm just not going to be so ready for Y show.
Yeah, I think there is a baseline for any show where you can create good, like an animator could create good animation to a certain level, and then that, at least from what I've seen, I think the suitability starts to become sort of a case of, like say, acting or comedic timing or something like that. But in terms of the physical mechanics of animation. I feel like any animator can do that should be able to do that to a certain point. And it might just be, and then it becomes a case of casting within your team a lot of the time. So the animation director might be, well, this is a really funny shot. I'm going to give that to the person within that team who's really good at funny, or vice versa. Someone who's got a really nuanced acting shot, I'll give that to them.
That comes up to having good leadership as well, doesn't it? Right, of the lead within the team being somebody who's got to a position of leading from having those people skills of being able to recognize how to balance their team and work with the different individuals' strengths and weaknesses or challenges. So rather than just getting to the top because you're really, really good at animating, but you don't have that interest in how to balance the team. So everyone needs to come with the basic competency and the ability to deliver the animation, but how they do that might differ. And if you've got the recognition of that, that's a good strength to have within your studio, I think.
No, Pauline, sorry, David, I was going to, obviously, I don't know how many people work at Blue Zoo currently, but I'm sure it's quite a few. And
at the moment, we've got 314.
That's quite a number of people. And obviously you as an individual, Pauline, can't individually manage all those people. It would just be impossible. So do you, obviously someone like Simon who's directing, because of Simon's awareness of his situation, is going to be more conscious and probably more empathetic to people working within his team. Are you able to provide training to other sort of managers or line managers?
Yeah, so we run a number of training initiatives. We try and tailor them to the company that we work in and the challenges that we face. I'm not going to say for a single minute that all of those training programs deliver perfect results. So we've done neurodiversity training, we've done mental health training, we've done people manager training. I do feel like there are so many individual situations that we can't always provide training that meets every need. What we can do is say, come to us and tell us if there's something that you need or that you're not sure about this, and to just try and provide as much support as possible. Mm-hmm. But I'm not saying for a single minute that we've got it right or perfect. Okay. Simon will tell you that. Simon and I have spoken for a long time about various issues and things, and we've tried to do our best, but it's not a one-stop thing. It's like we have to keep evaluating and saying, what are the things that are still creating, what do we need to address?
It's something I'm constantly kind of trying to wrangle with, that thought of that problem of training versus culture, like training versus work culture, and how you take a training session with several of your supervisors and permeate that through the entire business. And sometimes I wonder whether there is a sort of a basic very broad knowledge. Sorry, I'm trying to think of the right word. Basically, some basic kind of, because everyone's different, obviously. I wonder whether there's some sort of basic level of understanding that everyone can have as a starting point, so that you don't need to go on. So that those who didn't go on a day's training course about neurodiversity have still got a few like checks in place for that might stop them from making a certain assumption in the moment or something like that. A little bit like how sometimes you hear stories say, like, I know a teacher who's done some neurodiversity training but then tells the ADHD kid to stop fidgeting. Mm-hmm. They've been on that, but that it's as you can tell, it's not a complete thought or a solution.
It is. It's,
But it's something I'm
checking
always
for the
thinking about.
unconscious bias. It's checking for your unconscious
Yeah.
biases that you might have within your individual wider production and working out how to build it in to make it supportive for everyone.
No, absolutely. David, yeah, you can see you right your feet with your way there.
Just a short input I wanted to make. I think one of the things that is worth sort of saying at this point is that neurodiverse talent or people who are neurodiverse offer an X factor. I mean, they're superheroes. And these are going to give companies that edge because they have this superbly creative, fantastic brain that works in a 3D way, and that three-dimensional brain is so important. And that's the input I wanted to make. Really, how do you get these superheroes who are finding all the barriers about getting into the industry? How do we get them into the industry as smoothly as we possibly can, and then support them when they're in place?
And how do we get those people in, and not and as soon as they start struggling, put the same neurotypical assumptions on them.
Yeah, it's a bit like the new puppy syndrome from COVID, isn't it? Where everyone's like, "Oh, let's get this shiny new puppy in because they're cute," and then it's like, "Oh, now it's chewed my favourite shoes. Oh, it's not cool anymore." And that's definitely the puppy's fault. It's the puppy's for chewing the shoes. Let's go get a new puppy.
No, it's brand. I mean, one of the things that Film London has been doing is, a lot of training courses, and the unconscious bias thing is massive. There's actually an online test you can do. I think it might be MIT or somewhere, where it's a series of images and words, and it gets faster and faster and faster, and you can choose all kinds of sexism, racism, whatever you want, and you do this test, and it's incredible what the results are, because you think, I am the least, racist, sexist, whatever it is, person in the entire world. But this test, it's really simple, pulls out of you what's going on in the back of your mind. And the one thing that the training we did at Film London was that it is that your consciousness taking hold of your decisions and proactively thinking, am I, in this particular instance, am I making an informed decision, or is it something lurking in the back of my head that's just making me have a snap judgment? And what we were told was the more you do this positively and consciously, it's like muscle memory. Slowly, your unconscious, your subconscious bias begins to fade into the background a little bit more, because you're training yourself to think differently. And it's a very, very quick anecdote. We've got about another sort of 8-9 minutes to go, and there's one question from the audience. And I should have said earlier, if anybody in the audience has got a question, ping it into the chat, but we'll do our best to answer it. But about 18 months ago, I was working with somebody who's neurodiverse to give a presentation. And this particular person didn't want to come into a room, even though it was going to be 6 or 7 people, because they weren't comfortable. So we agreed to do it in some other way. A colleague of mine that was then sending this person lots of information about the scenario and basically overloaded them in the desire to give more information and help them understand what was going to happen. It was just this deluge of information, to which point this person emailed me and said, "Look, I'm really sorry, I can't cope with this. I'm pulling out." And they had told me right at the very beginning they didn't like doing phone calls because they couldn't see the person. And we've been having Zooms. And of course, my unconscious, not bias, but my unconscious way of working kicked into gear. And I said to this person, "I'll give you a call, don't panic." And I got this email back saying, "But how many times have I told you I cannot do phone calls?" And it was just that I just slipped back into that sort of neurotypical mode for a second. And I've been told so many times that that's not the way they like to communicate. Anyway, we did have another Zoom and it was fine, and they did a fantastic job and they were really, really helpful. But it is hard sometimes to not fall back into those traps.
I think it's a natural way of trying to understand other people and the world is how we build our knowledge. Is we go out and we seek this knowledge, and we're structuring this scaffolded foundation of like, I've now understood that thing and I've moved on because there's so much to understand. So we all have to sort of look back and have that flexibility to go, okay, that knowledge that I'd formed that was one of my foundational stones is maybe not as solid as I thought it was, and it's time to unpack it and have a look at it, whether it's actually being beneficial or whether it's creating a harmful situation now that isn't benefiting me to achieve what I want to achieve.
Wow, okay. Well, there's a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. It's Lewis John Crabtree, and then there was a follow-on from Steve Kimbrough, which is, it's in two parts. Would a studio, and I guess this is to Pauline really, would a studio let a neurodiverse person work with another person to get the best work that they could do, someone to help organise them? And the next one is, a big question about training for management when it comes to neurodiversity. How can a company train managers effectively to cover such a wide variety of neurodivergency so they can help build and train others to enjoy their work and be the best they can be? It's a big question, Pauline, sorry.
It's a big question. The first question, can you repeat the first question, Julian?
Would a studio let a neurodiverse person work with I'm guessing they mean neurotypical person,
yes,
so the neurodiverse person can get their best work?
If that was the right thing to do, if that was going to be the most supportive thing to do, then absolutely. What I would say is that I would, we wouldn't go, you're neurodiverse, come with this person. We wouldn't do that. But if there was some sort of reason to do that, or that was going to work, then yes, we would. The second question was?
That's about the training for management when it comes to neurodiversity. How can a company train managers to cover such a wide range of neurodiversity?
Yeah, so what I would say is that we have done neurodiversity training for managers in the studio. I think it's probably quite narrow. I mean, I think understanding neurodiversity in the same way as you might understand other things. I don't think that we can do a studio-wide training. Hello, gorgeous. I don't think we can do a studio-wide training on managing neurodiversity. I don't think that. I think we can do awareness training. And I think we can definitely put in place a more specific training. But we're certainly open to that, but we don't think that whatever we put in place is perfect, not at all. Okay. We're always open to try and understand what might be more helpful.
And also sometimes you see organically happening the first question where you just do have a producer that's paired with a director and everyone's like, oh, the director's creative, they can't possibly organise their own time. Yeah. And the producer's this wonder of organisation and executive function. And when they're together, they're unstoppable. So you just let that naturally happen, right? And those relationships develop.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've just got a couple of minutes left to run. So I just very briefly, I think from Simon, Alex, and Ari really is what your sort of parting thoughts to anybody who is neurodiverse looking to get into this sector. What would your sort of golden nugget of advice be? And Ari, if I can start with you.
All right, into the hot seat. Well, if you're a late diagnosed member of the neurodiverse community, I would say to recognize the shame and fear you'll have internalized and to try and build your confidence and find other people who will help you advocate for yourself and recognize when the system can be better for you, because you definitely have potential and the opportunity to do this. You just need to maybe stop beating yourself up and give yourself a chance and trust that others will too.
Thank you. Alex, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would very much like to double up on that, because the ways that we've learned to beat ourselves up in order to kind of try to fit in are incredibly damaging and take a very long time to find out what you're doing, because quite often it's not that transparent. But also, if there's something that comes so naturally to you to do that that's just how you enjoy spending your time, finding what the patterns are there. Like, oh, all of my hobbies have this common type of thinking or this common type of thing. Maybe that's kind of like a thought pattern that makes my brain happy. Like following that to see where it leads is how I kind of like got into that. I'm not in the industry yet, so I can't say if that has helped or not, but it feels like the right thing to do.
Thank you. Simon.
I probably that if you're in the industry and you're at any point having any sort of self-doubt about your ability, firstly, if you got that far already, you can already clearly do the job. But if you're in any self-doubt during a production, ask for clarification about and clear communication and direction about whether there is something that you could be doing better, whether there's a bit of information you're missing. Because I think either way, you'll either find out a way that you can improve if it is something you're doing, or you'll have the clarification that you're not doing anything wrong. It's just like, oh, this is one of those tricky shots, and we're just going to keep trying. I think to me at least, either of those situations seems better than sort of getting burned out by not completely understanding the situation and sort of ending up with sort of a cycle of imposter syndrome. So yeah, definitely, I think I would just say ask for clarification if you're unsure. Communication
is key, and recognizing you might need to translate to somebody who's not familiar with your communication style.
Thank you. David, any nuggets that you last passing nuggets?
No, I'm just like to say what a fantastic team of people you put together for today, and it's really inspiring. It's been really good. Thank you very much. Really good.
Paulene, last words. I think you might be on. You're still muted, I think, Paulene. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I just think it's really brilliant, and I want to just say that as an employer, like representative of an employer, the communication and the conversation is so important, because I'm not an expert, so I might be the head of people and talent, but I'm not an expert. So the conversation is so important. And it's my job to do research and all the rest of, it's my job to really pay attention, but I do need input from everybody else. Mm-hmm. And that's so important to me. And then we can say, well, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, we have
I appreciate the input from everybody in this so much.
Thanks, Paulene. We have to wrap it up there. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to David and Paulene, for their candor, and, Paulene being prepared to, from an employer's position, being so honest about situations. But I really want to say that the biggest thank you to Simon, Alex, and Ari, because I think coming onto this panel and being as honest and as open as you have been has been, I hope for the audience, has been, as David said, really inspiring. I think it's very brave of you to do this, and I will be forever grateful for you taking time out on your Sunday to do this. So on that note, thank you to my panel. Thank you to Nag and Claude back at the festival for enabling this and making it all happen. Have a great rest of your Sunday. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.